Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher here at Irish Breakdown, and I am going solo today. We have a lot going on. Vince is on a little bit of a school field trip. Ryan is a little under the weather, and Sean is on his way to South Bend. Notre Dame is having a press conference beginning at 2:30 this afternoon. So Sean is making the drive in from Chicago to attend that. So he's going to get a chance to meet all the new assistant coaches in Notre Dame, and he'll have plenty of stories and information. I am a little bit late. I had to put some recruiting intel, some recruiting scoop. Notre Dame is just found out today that a coach for a top 100 player thinks that Notre Dame is the leader for his student athletes. So I had to put that on the Irish Breakdown message board before we came. But I want to thank everybody for being here today. Caught a little bit of an audible. We were going to talk about the needs for Notre Dame on defense in the 2023 class. But because Ryan is under the weather, I was going to do that show solo, but I really want Ryan to be part of that show. So we're going to push that off. And I really felt it was a good time to really dive into the Notre Dame coaching staff and just this whole process and just, what we've learned from Marcus Freeman during this period of time, because, now that Al Golden is officially hired, it's all set. I mean, all 10 assistant coaches are in place. I think there's some back office stuff that's going to happen now. That's the next step. But the on-field situation has been taken care of, and I think that this was a big test for Marcus Freeman. And I think as we kind of go through this process, I think we learned a lot about the things he covets, the things that he finds important. I mean, covet in a positive way, what he looks for in coaches. I think we learned a lot about his willingness to give leeway to other coaches to sort of have roles in a decision, but also being willing to say, okay, but this is a hire that I want. And that's what a head coach has to do. So we learned a lot about Marcus Freeman. And I think big picture, it's important to kind of talk about this because, one of the things that I know we've talked a lot about here is when you look at what is really the key ingredients to being a championship football team. It's not just the head coach. It's not just the players. I think a very overlooked aspect of this is the assistant coaching aspect of it. And I think when I look at the best teams in the country, they'll usually have a dynamic coordinator or two, guys that are known as great recruiters, guys that are known as good teachers. There's a lot that goes into building a great team, and it's not just the coaching part, but the recruiting part, the relationship part, and a dynamic staff. In my opinion, a strong staff. What is a dynamic staff? It's a staff that's filled with really high-level teachers, guys that know how to teach the players how to play the game. A dynamic staff is filled with guys that have a really good mind for the game, guys that can break down film and watch an opponent and say, boy, that's the weakness. That's what we can exploit. That's how we can use this guy. A dynamic staff is one that is great on game day, with rotations and substitutions and play calls and, adjustments and things along those lines. A dynamic staff is one that obviously is great at talent acquisition. So all those things kind of factor into what makes a dynamic coaching staff. And I think that's something that is needed. And I think it's especially important in Notre Dame. I think because, look, we've never I've pushed back a lot over the years on this notion, how hard it is at Notre Dame. And it is harder at Notre Dame. I think we can all agree to that. But I think there's a difference between it being hard and it being too hard. And I think a lot of the excuses in the past had to do, well, it's too hard to do this, and this. When in reality, Notre Dame wasn't doing the things it needed to put itself in position to be successful. We have argued on this show that Notre Dame in 2015 had a roster as good as anybody's, but they didn't have a coaching staff and a strength and conditioning program as good as anybody's. And I think those are the things that have held Notre Dame back. There's been other years where you look and say, boy, that was a really talented football team. How were they not better? How was the 2011 team with all those first-round draft picks not better than 8-5? And it comes down to coaching and development and building a culture and all those type of things. And so that can't just be about the head coach. It can't be. It's got to be about the assistants. And there's so many different aspects that go into this. I think there's part of it is you've got to make sure that the staff is cohesive. They work together. That, these guys are all on the same, we're all working towards the same goal. You look at situations where you've got to make sure that your offensive staff meshes together and works well, that everybody understands what their roles are. You've got to make sure that your defensive players are doing the same thing. And I think when you look at it, this has to be a this has to be a situation for Notre Dame that they can't afford to not have these things. They can't afford to not have the dynamic coaching staff. They can't afford to not have guys that are grinders on the recruiting trail. They can't afford to not have a lot of the things that honestly this staff just hasn't had in recent years. And that's what Marcus Freeman was tasked with when you look at he was first hired and say what is your objective? What is your job? What is your primary responsibility as head football coach at the University of Notre Dame? And it is to put yourself in position to compete for championships. And the problem that Notre Dame has had far too often in recent seasons with Brian Kelly is he did not do the things necessary to put his program in position to be successful. And I think that is something that Marcus Freeman had to make sure he didn't make that same mistake. You'd have good coaching staffs in the past, but then they were balanced out by having a Brian Van Gorder or a Phil Longo, Paul Longo. I think those are the things that you look at and say, hey, look, you can't make those mistakes. You can't consistently make those mistakes. So the first big test for Marcus Freeman was going to be, can he put together a good staff? And how good of a staff? And it was kind of interesting because the process was a little bit of a, sort of a windy road. I guess this is a way to go as opposed to up and down. It's more of a windy road. And I'm going to be honest, there were a lot of times when I'm hearing things from sources and I'm looking at who I think the hires are going to be. And I'm like, it's unfortunate. It's going to be an okay hire, but not a great one. And there were some hires that at first I didn't like. I'll be honest with you. When Al Golden's name was first mentioned, I was not fired up about it just because, my immediate, superficial response is he hasn't called a game in a long time and the Miami situation. And then as you do a deeper dive, you see more context in the Miami situation. And then you realize he's not being hired to be the head coach. He's been hired to be the defensive coordinator. And, look, he's not going to need to be doing the defense all by himself. He will have Marcus Freeman if there is an adjustment period or not. So I came around on that hire. Now I'm fired up about it. And, the Chancey Stuckey hire. It was another coach that I would have preferred. But you kind of say, okay, let's see what you do. And the early returns are great. The people I've talked to that knew Coach Stuckey have all been very high on it. And so I think the first step of this was Marcus Freeman had to make some decisions about who wasn't going to be coming back. And that was going to be very telling. And I think it told a good story. There were three coaches that were not asked back. And that was obviously the receivers coach, the O-line coach, and the special teams coach. They were not going to be brought back. I think those were smart. Those are smart decisions. And then you say, okay, well, you've got to upgrade there. Well, then during the process, you lose three coaches that you thought you were going to have back at different times. And then you've got to replace those guys. Well, those were three of your better assistant coaches. So can you replace them and not, lose ground while you're gaining ground in other positions? So it was not an easy process for Marcus Freeman. And there were some bumps in the road in regards to, okay, I thought my staff was going to be this, but now it's not. Now I got to go do this. And I think that he handled it really, really well. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I like, really about the coaching staff that Marcus Freeman has put together. I think the first thing that I like is I like having young coaches. I like having veteran coaches, but I think you can err on the side of too many of one side. And I think when you look at Marcus Freeman's first coaching staff, I think he did a really nice job of putting together a staff that really combined the two very well. I think he did a nice job of bringing in some younger, sort of more energetic. Is the perception that you see, guys that maybe came up in a different era with different schemes and different thoughts and different ways of doing things. You have a 29-year-old offensive coordinator. Your receivers coach is 38. I believe your tight ends coach is in his 30s. You look at your defensive line coach is 37. Your corners coach is in his mid-30s. Your safeties coach is in his 20s. Your special teams coach is in his 30s. So some young coaches. But then that's balanced out on both sides of the ball with you go hire Harry Heastand, who's 60 years old, early 60s. Then you hire Dylan McCullough, who's in his like mid 40s, mid to late 40s. Defensively, you bring in Al Golden as a 52-year-old who has got a lot of head coaching experience, and that was an aspect to me that we thought was important. I mean, that having a coach on staff that has some of that head coaching experience that you can kind of lean on and say, hey, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, how did you handle this situation? Because the coach can tell you, here's how I handled it, and I didn't handle it right. And you can learn from it that way as well. And I think that was really important to have that kind of coach. I think he also hired big names. I think that big names matter, assuming those coaches can coach. You got to hire guys that can coach. And I'm a big believer that I don't care what your name is. If you've got the chops, you got the chops. But I think we'd be naive if we didn't also say, but there's merit to having a guy that's got the chops who also comes with a big reputation. That's going to have a big impact on your current team. It's going to have a big impact on recruiting. And we've already seen that with Harry Heastand on the offensive line. I think we're going to see that with Dylan McCullough at running backs, the running backs coach. Those are two guys that in on offense that are considered in the coaching world two of the very best at what they do at any level. Obviously Harry Heastand, we already know his reputation. I thought that was a tremendous hire. I thought that, Coach McCullough spent 3 years with the Chiefs. They hired him away from USC, was part of 2 Super Bowls, won a Super Bowl. The Giants came calling. Other NFL teams are going to come calling. Other colleges are going to come calling. So I thought that was important. Al Golden, obviously, is a big name. He's had a lot of success. Obviously, just came off of a Super Bowl appearance with the Bengals. And then Al Washington's another one. I mean, Al Washington's, a year ago was considered a rising star in the coaching world, turned down a defensive coordinator job at Tennessee, according to reports. Well, Ohio State's defense stinks this year, and it kind of takes some of the shine off of him, even though I don't think he all of a sudden stopped knowing how to coach. He didn't forget how to coach, right? I mean, sometimes, as we learned with Mike Elston, if you're on a staff that's not coordinated well and you don't call things well and it's not organized well, it doesn't really matter how good of an assistant coach you are, you're going to have some struggles. And so I think that's another one. That's kind of a guy that has a name. He's going to it's having Al Washington on your staff is going to carry some weight on the recruiting staff, on the recruiting trail. And I think that was important. But all of them can coach, right? That's the thing, is they can all coach. And I think that the other thing is, I think that having a veteran like Al Golden, a guy that's got some experience to him, a guy that's been around, is going to be good for Al Washington. It's going to be good for Mike Mickens. It's going to be good for Chris O'Leary. Obviously, it's going to be good for Marcus Freeman as well. And we had somebody in the chat, I think it was yesterday, brought this up, and it something I didn't really think about that I thought was a great point. And it was to me, it was you kind of looking at it like, look, Al Golden was a head football coach for 10 years. He was a head coach for 5 years at the University of Miami. This is a guy that's been an off defensive coordinator long time ago. I mean, back when Marcus Freeman was still a high school player and then into his early career at Ohio State. And the fact that Marcus Freeman, number one, was willing to go hire a coach that had that kind of name and reputation to replace him, right? Al Golden is gonna come in and have some strong ideas on things. You would hope that he does anyway. You wouldn't want to hire a defensive coordinator that doesn't have strong ideas and strong opinions on things. But then you go into a situation and say, okay, but that not all coaches are willing to do that. We kind of saw that a little bit with Brian Kelly, where he was not always willing to, bring in people that might challenge him or people that might, have some strong opinions on things. He wasn't always willing to do that. And you look at a situation where then what does it say about Al Golden that he took that job? I think that's a part of it too. And I think that part of the dynamic to me impressed me, that both of those coaches were willing to kind of go into that situation and work in that kind of situation. And I think that dynamic is going to be impressive, because the one thing about Al Golden that is very true, and I saw this firsthand, and I experienced this because he was coaching in the state of Virginia around the same time I was coaching in the state of Virginia. And I had a chance to kind of bump into him a lot on the recruiting trail. Is, this is a guy that has a reputation as a very strong recruiter. and you put him on a coaching staff with Al Washington, with Marcus Freeman, hopefully Mike Mickens and Chris O'Leary can continue to ascend and prove to be dynamic recruiters as well. You have the makings of a really special recruiting staff on defense. And I think that dynamic is impressive. And so I think that's kind of my overview of it. And I kind of want to get into some patterns that I look for. That's what I look for, is like what kind of patterns. There was the patterns in the Brian Kelly's, like, okay, he guys he had connection with, or you can find different patterns of what a coach looks for. And I think when you look at the hires that Marcus Freeman has made, there's three things that I think stand out, that either things I already know about coaches, or things that I learn about coaches as I reach out to sources and people that have hired coaches and or me covered these coaches and covered these programs and know about these coaches more than I do. So you reach out to these people and you kind of find out, what are you hearing? What are they, what's the reputation? What do the players say about them? Those type of things. And just trying to learn as much as you can. And when you talk to people, you kind of say, what are the common themes that are told about these coaches as you're talking to different sources about them, and then look at it holistically from the entire staff, and say, well, what are some things that that you see from a theme from the whole staff? And I think the first thing that stood out to me when you look at this staff, and you look at just kind of where Notre Dame is and what the reputations are, is each and every one of these guys, from Chancey Stuckey, even he's been a short period of time, Dylan McCullough, Jared Parker, Harry Heastan, Al Washington, Al Golden, and Brian Mason, that's the whole roster of coaches, as each one said, these guys are good teachers of the game. They know how to teach their players how to play the game. You listen to, there's several videos of Al Golden and several videos of his players talking about, why they liked playing for him, is he was able to make complex things less complicated, and they could go execute it at a higher level. That's really important. And that's a common theme. I mean, we know Harry Heastan had it. I've heard it about Dylan McCullough. I've heard it about all these coaches. And then you look at it and say, well, what's the next thing that stands out? I think the next thing that stands out is recruiting. You hear the only really question mark I had in recruiting of the hires was Coach Stuckey, because he just hasn't been doing it very long. Well, if you look at the intel that I just put on the board at the Irish Breakdown message board, premium message board, the intel I put out about a top player that now his head coach thinks that Notre Dame leads for, and it's a lot of it has to do with Chancey Stuckey. And so far he's done a great job. But the Notre Dame coach, Marcus Freeman, felt, and coaches at Notre Dame felt, that he would immediately make a splash in recruiting. Harry Heastan, we know about. Dylan McCullough is considered a great recruiter. Al Washington is considered a great recruiter. Brian Mason is someone who I've talked to a lot of people that have praised the job he does as a recruiter. And, of course, Al Golden was known to that. And as Marcus Freeman said, look, you want to come coach for me, you got to be a recruiter, I think he said dynamic recruiter. And so far he's done a good job of hiring exactly those kind of coaches. So I think that's very important, because we talk a lot about, oh, it's harder at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame can't do this, and Notre Dame can't do that, and all these different things that people complain about when it comes to Notre Dame. And look, if we all accept the premise that, yes, it's harder at Notre Dame, but it's not impossible at Notre Dame, then putting a staff together that's filled with dynamic recruiters and strong recruiters is exactly what you have to do to kind of balance out the fact that there are difficulties when it comes to Notre Dame, and when it comes to putting it together an entire coaching staff. And so, to me, I look at it and I say, he's done exactly what you need to do at Notre Dame when it comes to recruiting. He's hired a coaching staff filled with really good recruiters. And I would argue that now guys like Mike Mickens have to really step up their game, because in the past he was one of their better recruiters, and now it's like, these other guys are going to come in there and grind too, buddy. You got to step it up, and I think that's great, because that kind of friendly rivalry I think is great in recruiting. Hey, man, Tommy Rees talked about that when Marcus Freeman was the defense coordinator. Like, hey, look what he's doing. I got to up my game, and I think now you've got a roster of coaches full of this stuff. I think that's really important when it comes to talent acquisition, is You have to have coaches that put in the work. You have to have coaches that are successful at it, coaches that know how to have what does it mean to go be a recruiter? You have to have the personality to be successful. You have to, a track record can help. You have to be someone who can connect well with players in different ways. You have to be someone that's organized. You have to have a plan to make sure that you're on your whole board. You have to be good at talent evaluation, and then you have to close. Now that's the part we don't know about yet because this staff has not gone through a signing day. But those are the things that go into it, and they've so far the results have been pretty good, and they all have strong reputations. And there's the last piece that we've talked a little bit about, and that I think is important. I want to spend some time on it, and that is a common theme with all these coaches has been I've heard this phrase: the players love him. And whether it's Harry Heastan or Dylan McCullough or Chancey Stuckey, all the coaches, Al Golden, Al Washington, players love him. I haven't heard one person say like, he doesn't push his players. He's just maybe not hard enough on him, not demanding. That's not the thing. The players love him. And I think that's a huge thing. We've praised Mike Elson for this in the past. This is something I think Marcus Freeman puts a lot of value in when he was a position coach. This is something that I think has to be a part of what Notre Dame is about. I think it should always be a part of what Notre Dame is about. But I think in today's era, it's incredibly important, even more than it's ever been. And the reason I say that is because of different rules that have been enacted in college football, rules that I don't think are good for the game. The no penalty transfer rule, just being able to leave whenever you want with no consequences. The NIL stuff and the Wild West manner in which it has been enacted. I think there's a lot of things that it's going to make it harder for it's going to kind of create a twofold problem. Number one, you're getting to a situation where it's going to be harder for Notre Dame to engage in talent acquisition in some of the ways that other schools are. I think the NIL, not the NIL, but the transfer portal, the way that it's been done, does put Notre Dame at a disadvantage right now because they can't just go out and get Jahmyr Gibbs and guys like that because of the fact that it's way harder to get to Notre Dame as a transfer student than as a high school student. And the fact that as of now, I think Notre Dame is in a situation where it's just there's just a big sort of acquisition stream that they can't really partake in all that much. And I think that is, to me, it's a challenge. So Notre Dame is in a situation where if they lose a bunch of players, they can't just go out in the portal and replace them like a USC can, like an Alabama can. And so it's going to be imperative that Notre Dame maintain the players they have as much as they can. And if they are going to lose players, it's guys that they have they're okay losing because they're going to go replace them with the high school recruits because they're just making room for guys that can play. It's imperative that continue. And the reality is not every kid's going to be enticed to stay because he's playing. You can't play everybody. I do think there are things you can do. Play a deeper rotation. If you're playing 5-6 receivers a game, that's more guys are going to be happy than if you're playing 3 or 4 a game, right? Same with running backs. If you're only playing one running back's getting all the touches and the other 2 are just kind of coming in just to give them a breather, like Brian Kelly said 2 years ago about Chris Tyree. It just comes in to give Kyron Williams a breather. Those are things that are not going to help you. Are not going to help you keep players happy. It's just not the way that it works. And so, I think that you have to have a staff in place that thrives on building connections with players, on building relationships and bonds and trust with players. Because what I found in my experience of being a part of college football since 1997 as a player, then as a coach, as an analyst, back to being a coach, back to being an analyst, I found that players they're okay with you being hard on them. Most great players, the guys you want on your team, want to be coached. Most of them want to be challenged. Now, when I say coached hard, I'm not talking about in your face MFing them all the time. I'm talking about coaching them hard, meaning you're just demanding, always on them, always demanding more, always asking for more. But part of that has to be balanced with the trust that, hey, I know why coach is asking more of me. I know why coach is pushing me. I know why coach thinks that I need to do this or that I can do that or that I need to run more, work harder, or that this 100-yard game wasn't good enough because I should have had 150, or this 10 tackle game wasn't good enough because I should have had 15, or I didn't make the tackle that mattered. And I think you have to be demanding of young people if you're going to compete for a championship. But if you're demanding and there's not a relationship behind it, then what you're going to find is there's not going to be a trust level there. If there's not a trust level there, then kids are going to leave. And sometimes they're going to leave and they're starters or they're key contributors because they don't trust you. They don't think you have their back. And in football, if you don't trust the guy that you're being coached by, I don't care what playing time you're getting, you're not going to be happy. And it's at a place like Notre Dame where there's also the academic demands and the social demands and all these other aspects of it is if you don't trust the guy in front of you, then it's going to be harder to keep guys here. I think that's a piece of it. But there's a second piece of it too. I've had a chance, Sean Davis has shared similar stories. I've had a chance over the years doing this job to get to know several players very well, to get to know a lot of parents very well. And I have been shocked over the years to hear time and time and time and time and time again from players. And I'm not talking backups, third stringers who are mad that they didn't play and left. I'm talking about guys that were captains, guys that were drafted, guys that are currently playing in the NFL. I've been shocked how how often I hear the phrase, they play for each other because they don't trust the head coach. And in some instances, it was the coordinator, the position coach. And so these kids are playing for each other. I mean, I heard this a ton in 2018 and Sean and Malik Zaire have talked about this in the Lucky Lefty podcast where they did things in spite of the coaching. That's what they felt. You can't have that. And even if players are bought into staying because of the academics, if they think they're just playing for each other and not also playing for you, there's going to be a lower ceiling on what you can be as a program at the end of the day. And so I think the fact that Marcus Freeman has hired coaches that come with great reputations in regards to building that trust, that bond, that connection with players, in it to me is it's incredibly invaluable from a winning and losing standpoint. It can be the difference between a close win and a close loss. It can be the difference between the mindset stepping on the field against a good team of whether you think you can win or you're going to win. It can be the difference in the fourth quarter when you step on the field with 2 minutes left and you get the ball at midfield at Georgia with and you're down 6. Your connection, you're playing for each other, but your faith that, hey, man, we got the ball. I know Coach Reese is going to put us in position to be successful. I just got to go do my job. When you have that mindset, that mentality, hey, I know Coach Stuckey's coached me up and I'm ready to go. I know Coach Eastand's gotten me ready to go. Those type of things. Then I think that can be the difference in those situations. And then, of course, with roster management, I think it's very, very important. So I think when I look at the aspects of what Marcus Freeman has built at Notre Dame with this coaching staff, I think he struck all the right notes and all the right chords when it comes to looking at all the important things of what goes into building a coaching staff. And that is the teaching aspect, the relationship aspect, and the recruiting aspect. I think all three of those, I mean, it's check, check, check for all the coaches. And, I think that now we've got to get this group of coaches to sort of mesh together. That's going to, be what the next 5-6 months is going to be about, getting everybody on the same page and, working towards the same goals. But the potential is there. And I it would have been hard for, I mean, there's a, coach here, coach there I could get into. I'm not going to say names. It's hard for me to, now that I look back and I know who the 7 new coaches are, to really say, boy, I don't know if it could have gone a lot better, to be honest with you. And I even on some coaches that initially when they were on the board, I wouldn't have said that about. And so I mean, if you're a Notre Dame fan, I think you got to be excited about what they've done, in my opinion. I mean, you've got to be pretty fired up about what they've done. So I'm gonna dive into some questions here, and before I do, I got to give you all just a little bit of a heads up on kind of what the rest of this day is going to look like. Obviously, I'm going to have a little bit of a Q&A here. We'll talk about some of the questions that you all have, and we'll dive into some more things. But I hope you're all fired up about what Coach Freeman has done. We were going to have we normally have a Wednesday night recruiting show. We're going to have that tonight, but we are not going to have that tonight because somebody, that would be me, has a wife whose birthday is today. So my wife Angela's birthday is today, and she is out currently getting her driver's license to the DMV. Imagine that. But she's going to have a little massage later today, and then I'm going to make a home cooked meal for her. I'm going to make some chicken parm for her tonight, and then we're going to make a birthday, and then we're going to start a fire and have some fun and just relax. Her parents are in town. It's going to be a nice, fun night. So we are not going to. I guess my wife apparently is listening to the show today. So while she's sitting at the DMV. So we will not have a show tonight because I'm going to be hanging out with my wife. We will reschedule for either Thursday or Friday. And we'll still have that PM show this week. It's just not going to be tonight. And I just wanted to let everybody know that little scheduling change. And also, we are going to have a show on Saturday. Sean Davis and I are actually going to talk about. We're going to look at now that the new coaches are on board, and now that the coaches are on board, we're going to kind of look at the different coaches and get into sort of who has the toughest task. Right? Which of these coaches, in our view, has the toughest task and the most important task when it comes to just the immediate need. So we're looking mostly at the 2022 season, and so we'll dive into that. Sean and I will dive into that, and it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun. So we're going to do that on Saturday. So we will have our normal Thursday, Friday show. We'll have our mailbag on Friday. And then that'll be our Saturday show. And then I'll let you guys know. That's why you need to make sure that you have hit the subscribe button and hit the subscribe button and make sure that you hit the notification bell so that when we do schedule that show, you will you will know that we're going out. So yes, Gideon Rosa would like to tell Angela, thank you to Angela for letting Brian do this for us. Hey, I was not going to sit in the DMV with her. So I was like, well, she's at the DMV, so I'm going to be able to do a show today. So there you go. So here we go. Let's dive into some questions. We had some really good questions, and I think that it's just some good. I want to get some comments too, but we have a couple super chats here. Bronx ND fan would love to be in a barbershop with the entire coaching staff and Brian talking ball. I would too. I would love to be there. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but yes, I would love to be sitting around talking ball with the Notre Dame coaches and just picking their brains and just kind of seeing where they're all at. That would be a whole lot of fun. Bill Kostrom says, now that the staff is in place, thank you for the super chat, Bill. Thank you for the super chat too, Bronx ND fan. Now that the staff is in place, there will be subtle differences, but what are some glaring changes we will see in spring ball and fall camp that will make us smile? And one thing I didn't talk about too is I think there are two really strong off the field hires that Marcus Freeman has made already in Chris Watt and James Laurinaitis, which I think also is going to play a big role in this. And that's a mistake on my part to not mention them sooner, because that's a very, very important piece to this as well. The support staff in football today is so much more important than it was 15, 20, 10 years ago, but even especially 15, 20, 30 years ago. And those were, I think, two very, very strong hires. And I think that's kind of the next step for Coach Freeman, is filling out that part of his staff is going to be important. But I think the one thing is just going to be energy. I think that's something that I'm looking forward to, is the what I hear about the coaches, that being young doesn't mean you're going to be energetic. If you're a quiet personality, I don't care if you're 22 or 52, you're going to be a quiet personality. But from what I'm hearing about all these coaches, they bring a lot of energy, a lot of emotion, a lot of fire. I think you're going to see, we've already heard from players about in the spring about how, Notre Dame was in a situation where, they're out there just getting a ton more reps and getting a ton more work in, and just there's not as much standing around. And I think that's important, because I could have a 15-minute shorter practice than you, but if my practice is very structured and we're going here to here to here to here to here, and we're moving and we're doing these things, and while we're doing special teams, this group's over here getting work in, and on this day when we're doing special teams, this other group's over here getting work in. I think I'm going to end up getting more reps in my practice than you will in yours because we were so much more structured. And I think that's a very, very important piece of this. I think we're going to see that. We're going to see a lot of energy. I'm hoping, Bill, that when we get into fall, that manifests in how they play on Saturdays. I think it's a big thing. This Notre Dame team hasn't always been the most genuine swagger. They haven't always been the most confident team. I think they haven't been the most fiery team always. I think we saw a little bit of an uptick this year, a little bit in some areas. But I want to see a team that plays with a lot of fire, a team that plays with a lot of emotion, good, healthy, like focused emotion. I'm not talking about emotional, but just playing with emotion. There's two different things. And so I think when I look at those type of things, Bill, I think those are the first things that we'll see. I think those are the first things that we'll notice when Notre Dame is out there. I think those are the reports we'll hear and those type of things. And I think the other thing too is, and I don't know how we're going to see this necessarily early on, but I think that when I look at, I just think there's a lot better teachers here. I think that's the biggest thing. I think we're going to see the offensive line, playing with force again, coming off and hitting people again. I think we're going to see receivers that know how to get off the line and are, know how to stack and lean and manipulate and have improved top ends and attack the football and all those type of things. So I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see a team that just overall is just a better coached football team. I think Tommy Rees gets a bad rap for some things that happened in 2021 that I think weren't on him, in my opinion. And I think if he had quality coaches at those positions, I think that the situation. I think the situation would have looked a lot different. And a good coordinator is only as good as his assistants. I mean, that's the reality. If I'm the quarterback's coach and offensive coordinator, I can't coach the offensive line. I can't coach the receivers and the running backs and the quarterbacks. I can only control what I can control. I think he's going to be surrounded by a much better staff top to bottom. I mean, John McNulty was a good football coach. Lance Taylor's a good football coach. But you all know my stance on the offensive line and receiver situations. And so, I think that to me is the things that I look for that I think we will see. I think we will see. So those are things. Those are things I think, Bill, that we'll certainly get a chance to see right away. All right, let's get to a few more of these. So thank you for that, Bill. Terry Howie says there are two very good interviews with Al Golden at Cincinnati Bengals YouTube channel. Very smart man who is very well respected in the game. Thank you for that, Terry. Yes, there's some interviews there. There's also like Dave Lapham. I think that's his name. He's a former Bengals player. He did an interview with Al Golden where he was talking. It's really good. And I would encourage you to look at some of the interviews that were done with the players at Cincinnati and when they were giving their opinion about Al Golden. Bronx MD fan says the Golden hire is a textbook example of emotional intelligence. Only a confident leader would make this hire. BK would never be comfortable hiring someone with that resume. I want to be clear. BK has hired people with that resume, but it was never to run the side of the ball that he was on, right? Like, I mean, look at Brian Kelly made a great hire in Mike Elko. Brian Kelly made a great hire in Marcus Freeman. I think Brian Kelly made a smart decision to promote Clark Lee and let them go do what they do, especially Marcus Freeman, because Marcus Freeman kind of came in with a little bit of like that rock star personality, where he was kind of maybe the name was bigger than the resume, right? And the reputation was bigger than the resume. And Brian Kelly made that hire. But Brian Kelly's an offensive coach. I think that's the difference here is Marcus Freeman is replacing Al Golden to replace himself. And to hire someone, and he's going to have a hand in, I want the defense to be this, 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 and this, but still bringing in someone that's not just going to be a puppet for you or just, hey, whatever Coach Freeman says and does. You want someone that you're going to have a relationship with, that you can give input to, but you want to bring in someone, if you're a smart coach, you want to bring in someone that also is going to have some strong ideas and some strong personalities and willing to say to you, hey, coach, I hear what you're saying, but I think there's a better way, and then be able to pound on the table and defend his way. Al Golden's going to be that kind of guy. And I think you're correct. It takes a confident leader to make that kind of hire on the side of the ball that is his area of expertise. I think that's the difference. And I think you're right. I don't think Brian Kelly would have made that type of hire. My only caveat is I would say on his side of the ball, which is we all know that Brian Kelly viewed himself more as an offensive guy. Truman Dumel. This is I didn't talk about this during the show because I saw your question and I thought this was a really good point that I wanted to get to. Truman says, talking about what Hiestand, McCullough, Golden having NFL pedigrees means to our coaching staff. So it's not just that, though. I would even go further. I think Hiestand, McCullough, Golden have it, but I think we also look at Chancey Stuckey having played in the NFL somewhat recently. And I think those are some important positions, especially the defensive coordinator and the offensive line coach. Those are important positions. And I think what this helps you with, Truman, is number one, I think in the NFL, you have to have we talked about this yesterday. You have to have a little bit of versatility, multiplicity in how you attack, because the Tennessee Titans are going to do things a whole lot different than the Kansas City Chiefs, right? And so you have to be able to adjust and adapt, and I think that's important for a guy like Al Golden. But when it comes to Coach Hiestand and Coach McCullough, it's going to be a situation where, the key is going to be, it's going to really be about recruiting. I mean, that's the biggest asset, Truman, is when you're Notre Dame, like Al Golden can go to Keon Keeley and say, hey, Keon, you want to know what it takes to get to the NFL? Hey, I just was a linebackers coach. I was in the NFL for the last 6 years. I know what we look for. I know the traits we look for. I know when NFL teams value and covet when they're going to the draft process. And I know I know what we looked for, and I know how to get you there. And Coach Washington can get you there, and I can get you there. Harry Hiestand, hey, look at what the success I've had, not only developing guys for the NFL, but why have I had that success? Because I coach in the NFL. I coach in the Super Bowl. Notre Dame has 3 assistant coaches that have coached in the Super Bowl. Harry Hiestand with the Bears back in, 06, 07, somewhere around there. Dylan McCullough has a Super Bowl championship ring, and he coached in another Super Bowl. And now Al Golden has a Super Bowl appearance. So they can say, hey, look, I've been in the pinnacle of that profession. I know what it takes to get there. I know what we look for. I know how to teach it, and I know how to coach it. And so I think from a recruiting standpoint, that is a huge, huge plus for Notre Dame to have multiple coaches that can say, hey, look, I know how to do this. I know how to get you there. I know how to coach and do whatever the case may be to get you where you need to get to. So that's a great question, Truman. And I think that is something that is going to be a major asset. And it's actually fewer NFL coaches now than it was before, because before you also had McNulty was part of that deal too, on offense anyway. So and I forgot, mentioned Tommy Rees coached in the NFL. Tommy Rees coached with the Chargers for a year as well. So so that's another coach that has NFL experience. So I think those kind of things certainly help. Andres Nito, I'm pumped to watch this group get started this spring. How do you think this coaching staff assembly compares to BK's best coaching staff builds? I don't think it's fair comparing BK's to Marcus Freeman's first staff. I think that's a fair thing to say, Andres. I think because when you look at Brian Kelly was stepping into a situation where he was replacing a failed coach essentially, and Notre Dame's. There's a lot of things that was going to make it harder to build the right kind of staff then than there is now. I think that's a fair thing to point out. So we were actually talking about this on the message board, Irish Breakdown message board, and it was, what would people consider the best coaching staff in Notre Dame? And I personally felt like the best coaching staff that Brian Kelly ever had was that 2017 coaching staff, because you had Chip Long at OC. I thought Chip did a good job. You had Tommy Rees as your quarterbacks coach. You had Harry Hiestand as your O-line coach. And this is kind of where it wasn't as good. But you had Autry Denson as your running backs coach. You had Dell Alexander as your receivers coach. Then on defense, I thought that was an excellent staff for the most part. I thought you had Mike Elson at defensive line. You had Mike Elko coaching linebackers. Clark Lee coaching linebackers. You had Todd Light coaching corners. You had Mike Elko coaching safeties. And I thought that was a really, really good class. Plus, you had Matt Bayless. And the whole thing I haven't talked at all about the show, that's a mistake on my part. So we haven't talked about Matt Bayless still also being a part of this thing. So he's also staying. That's a huge, huge thing for Notre Dame. And so you look at it and you say, okay, that was the best Brian Kelly coaching staff. And the reason I say that is because you had two good coordinators. The thing is now, as you look at that 2017 staff, at the time Chip Long came to Notre Dame, he had 1 year as a coordinator under his belt, and that was at Memphis. Tommy Rees has now 2 years of being a coordinator under his belt at Notre Dame. Running backs coach, huge upgrade with Dylan McCullough over Autry Denson. Wide receivers coach, I think Chancey Stuckey is definitely an upgrade over Dell Alexander. The only question is going to be how much of one. Harry Heastan, obviously a wash. Tommy Rees, quarterbacks coach, that's a wash. Defensively, D-line, Al Washington and Mike Elston. I think at the time, Coach Elston's second stint as the defensive line coach was better than his first stint. And the first stint was good too, but his second stint was better, and that was his first year of it. And I thought, so I think that's, to me, about a wash. I think when you look at linebackers, Clark Lee and Al Golden, I would give the edge to Al Golden just from experience and obviously coaching at the highest level. But I think Clark Lee was a good linebackers coach. I think he was a better coordinator than he was necessarily a linebackers coach. But he's still a good linebackers coach. It's just of two really good linebacker coaches, who do I think is better? I think I would give it to Al Golden. Now, what we don't know is if he's going to be as good of a coordinator as Clark Lee was starting in 2018. And I don't know if Al Golden, like from a coordinator standpoint, I got to give the edge to Mike Elko because I could pop in film and evaluate the job Mike Elko did. I can't do that with Al Golden. It would have to be me sort of taking a leap of faith to do that, and that's really where it comes from. And you guys know me. I like evidence, right? Like I like data. I like to be able to pop in film and say, this is why I think Mike Elko was the great hire. I did that with Marcus Freeman last year. This is why I think Marcus Freeman's a great hire. Why? Was it about this? Is about no? It's because I popped in the film and I said, boy, that's a really well coached defense. And I just can't do that with Coach Golden because he hasn't been a defensive coordinator since 2005. I will say, however, with Coach Golden, my stance on him is very similar to my stance on Clark Lee going into 2018. I advocated for Coach Lee being promoted to a defensive coordinator in 2018. And my thought was, obviously, there's going to be continuity. I like continuity, but it's not the end-all, be-all. It was, I think if you got the chops, you got the chops. And what I knew of Clark Lee, I thought he had the chops. And so there's that same leap of faith with Al Golden that I took with Clark Lee. That worked out, but I can't compare Al Golden to Marcus Freeman and Mike Elko because I just don't have film to look at and say, hey, here's what I see from him. So obviously you'd have to, by default, give the edge to Mike Elko, who I thought was a really darn good defensive coordinator and is proven to be a really darn good defensive coordinator. Secondary-wise, I think safeties coach. Again, Elko was the safeties coach, so it's kind of hard to hold Chris O'Leary at the age of 26, 27 up to that standard. Cornerbacks coach, Todd Light versus Mike Mickens. I'd probably give the edge to Mike Mickens slightly. But, I think Todd Light was a pretty decent corners coach. I just think his issue was more on the recruiting trail. So, and I think you have to give the edge now to Matt Bayless from a strength conditioning standpoint from Matt Bayless in 2017, because in Matt Bayless 2017, he was still pushing to overcome sort of what happened before, where now, he's in year, 6, right? 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, 22, so year 6. So he's got 6 years of this sucker rolling. And so I think that the strength conditioning aspect of it, I think you have to give, and you have to like where they're at now compared to where they were then. So I think as long as you accept my premise of 2017 being the best coaching staff that he had, I think it's advantage. I think it's advantage this current staff based on what we know of all the coaches. Get a few more questions here before we get out of here. Ed says, I just don't know if the coordinators are going to have elite game planning. Tommy Rees seems smart, but he hasn't yet proven it. Al was a good DC 15 years ago. Is he still? That kind of gets back to my point. But look, being a coordinator isn't something you just forget how to do, right? Like Clark Lee, like I said, Clark Lee had never been a coordinator when he got hired and promoted for that job. If you got the chops, you got the chops. And we'll find out if Al Golden has that. I don't know the answer to that. Look, I'm excited about what the staff can be, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you all, hey, look, y'all, Don't worry about it. Trust me, Al Golden's going to be phenomenal. I don't know. I'm optimistic, but I don't know, right? And so we always have to the way we do it here is we're always going to give you our honest opinion, but we're not homers. This isn't a homer site. Oh yeah. Don't worry. He's going to be phenomenal. I don't know if he's going to be phenomenal. I'm optimistic. I think there's a lot of encouraging signs, but I don't know. The whole Tommy Reese hasn't proven it yet thing. Part of me wonders if part of the thing that we're seeing here with Tommy Reese, because I see Tom Reese catch a lot of flack in social media. I see a lot of flack in which, I mean, social media is what it is. But I see a lot of flack about last season and different aspects. He hasn't proven this, that, the other thing. And you know, I guess I just see it differently because I think how you evaluate a coordinator is, what's he doing on the job he's asked to do? And I mean, there was plenty of times last year where you say, boy, how as a coordinator, like, what do you do when you can't run the ball? What do you do when your offensive line can't pass protect more than 2 seconds? Like, what's the thing on your call sheet you go to at that point in time? And that's the thing that kind of frustrates me a little bit is I think that people are kind of putting on him maybe what some other people, like what some other people should be judged for. Tommy Reese isn't the person that hired Dell Alexander. He's not the person that hired Jeff Quinn. And I think as we saw, I think if Tommy Reese puts his foot down and says, I don't want these guys to leave, and Marcus Freeman says, I don't care, they're leaving, one of two things is going to happen. Either if Tommy Reese puts his foot down about these two coaches, one of two things is going to happen. Marcus Freeman is going to relent and let him keep them, which means they're still on staff. Or B, Marcus Freeman say, no, that's not happening. And then Tommy Reese gets mad, picks up his stuff, and leaves. Right? That's what he would have done. The fact that Tommy Reese is still here and they're not here tells you to a degree that Tommy Reese is on board with that decision. Why would that be if it wasn't for the fact that he knew that they need to be better at those positions? And I think that they are better. They're going to be a lot better at those positions. So I think Tommy Reese was a much better game planner and play caller than people give him credit for. We've talked about this in the bowl game. Are there some calls that I would have liked to seen differently? Listen, Notre Dame could have scored just as many points in the second half as did in the first half. And there's always going to be a time that you can look at and say, boy, I didn't like that call right there. I would hope that Tommy Reese is that way. Like, yeah, we scored 50 points, but man, I wish I could have that 1 second quarter call back. That's how great coaches are. I mean, that's how great competitors are. It's like, yeah, we won, but man, I wish I could have that one call back, because the goal being the next time you play, you don't want to make that second quarter mistake. So I would imagine that Tommy Reese is going to have some of that, as all good coaches do. But I mean, look, let's not forget he designed a play in the second half that got Lorenzo Styles open on a post route. The throw was long and Lorenzo didn't lay out. I mean, that's not necessarily Tommy Reese. There were adjustments they made. Those adjustments didn't work because they couldn't run block. And Oklahoma State figured it out. Say, hey, look, they can't run the ball on us, so this is what we're going to do. So I actually thought he made some adjustments. It's just, again, he was coaching with one hand tied behind his back because he had a receivers coach that, couldn't teach kids how to get off a press, and he had an offensive line coach that couldn't teach run blocking all that effectively, especially this past year. So I think Tommy Reese is a lot more proven and a lot more effective this year than I think a lot of people give him credit for. I think the other problem with Tommy Reese is perception. I think I'd be curious. I'm not going to say. I'd be curious if some of you that are critical of Tommy Reese are deep down. It's more about you don't like how he got here. You didn't like the original hire and the premise behind it. The fact that Brian Kelly said it's a national search, and we all knew it wasn't a national search. We all knew that Tommy Reese is going to be the guy. That he's kind of conceived as Kelly's boy and all these different things. And that may all be true as far as what Kelly's actions to get him here. At the time, I told you at the time, I didn't love the hire at the time. I thought there was a couple coaches that were better, including one who just won a national championship, that you could have gone and tried to get that would have been better for 2020. But the thing I said at the time is it may hurt you in 2020, but it's going to pay off in the long run because Tom Reese is a really smart coach. And I think we've started to see that manifest. Look, I'm not quite sure how it went down, but I can say with good confidence that coming out of the bye week, Tommy Rees was given a lot more authority to run the offense the way he wanted to run the offense. The final 6 games of the year, Notre Dame scored 40 points a game. The final 6 games of the year, Notre Dame averaged over 93 points per game. The final 6 games of the year, Notre Dame averaged 7.2 yards per play. All those rankings would have been top 10 if you put them out over the course of the year. Yes, the teams weren't as good, but Notre Dame did to those teams what you're supposed to do to teams when you are superior talent-wise and you coach better. They wiped all of those teams out. And we saw a lot of schematic things from Tommy Rees. I think this is going to be a good off-season project, is to kind of go through, try to find as much film as I can to, this will be something that we put on the premium message board because I can't put it out, publicly, but, go through some things and try to find some film where we can kind of point that out. So, I think that would be something that would be really fun to do to kind of help show people exactly what I'm talking about. Angela would like to thank all of you for the birthday wishes. She loves her IB family. So thank you all for wishing my wife a happy birthday. Means a lot. I know I didn't realize she was watching the show. So that's really awesome. So thank you all for that. Okay, let me just get to a few more questions here, and we will get out of here. Again, we'll be back tomorrow for another show. I think Stephen Hegarty, Stephen and I are on the same page here. I agree with that. I do think Tommy Rees. I do think Tommy Rees is a guy that was handcuffed, and I've heard this said a lot too about Tommy Rees. He doesn't develop quarterbacks, or he's not into technique and things like that. Somebody made that comment. I don't agree with that. Look. Tommy Rees did not handle the Phil Dracovic situation well at all. I'll never change my mind on that. Tommy Rees could call me tomorrow. He won't, but Tommy Rees could call me tomorrow and explain to me the whole situation, and I'm going to tell him, I don't agree with you. You did not handle that well. Having said that, that was kind of his first years, second year as a coach, and he wasn't the quarterback that he recruited, and I don't know if that's there's a whole lot of things. But I think he got the most out of Ian Book that he can get out of Ian Book. I think we saw Jack Cohn really progress throughout the year. I think some of the issues that Jack Cohn had early in the year were not about Tommy Rees. They were about Jeff Quinn more than Tommy Rees. But Tommy Rees found ways to get more out of Jack Cohn. He found ways to adapt the system to Jack Cohn. I think Jack Cohn's mechanics had to change a lot in 1 year at Notre Dame. That's the thing, is being a primarily under center quarterback and then going from that to a primarily shotgun quarterback requires a lot of change. And I think Tommy Rees did a good job of getting Jack to the point where he was able to make that change. And Jack is now going to be a much more prepared NFL potential target because of the year he spent working with Tommy Rees in this offense. So again, he's not the receivers coach. He's not. He is the quarterback's coach. He can't go coach the receivers how to play. He can't go coach the offensive line on how to play. He has to coach the quarterbacks. And that's why you hire other good assistants. So I just feel like I feel like maybe it's because he's like the last sort of DNA of Brian Kelly. So there's just some harshness to him because of that I don't think should be there. I think we need to evaluate Brian Kelly for who Brian Kelly is. And to me, that's, we need to evaluate Tommy Rees for who Tommy Rees is, not for who Brian Kelly is. We need to evaluate Tommy Rees for the job he does, not because of, some feelings we may have about his coach. So I just wanted to address that because we've seen that kind of. Do we really have I don't know who that was, but he's blocked now. Let me see here. Get down to a few more of these questions, and we're going to get out of here. Let me see. Let me pull up a few of these questions, so just bear with me here for a second. All right. Okay, got a few more here. Let's get to. All right, timeout. Tommy says Notre Dame has a recruiting coordinator. Would it repetitive to hire defensive and offensive recruiting coordinators, or are there advantages? Well, I don't think they have a recruiting coordinator yet. I don't think that move has been made official, but I do believe that if you're going to have like one main recruiting coordinator, I do think there are advantages to having a guy that specifically works with the offense and a guy that specifically works with the defense. As long as everybody's on the same page and kind of working together, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that's not an issue at all. But I think I think look, I'd expand the recruiting staff in general. I would, I'd instead of just Chad Bowden and Dre Brown, I'd have Chad running the whole thing. I'd have a guy working with the offensive coaches, a guy with the defense coaches that all kind of report to Chad, and then I'd have just a staff that's just their goal is to just reach out to kids and develop connections and do it. Make sure the staff knows what they need to do. I think there's a lot of that could happen, and it's happening. That's something that Marcus Freeman is the one that got that coming at Notre Dame. That was part of the deal for him coming over, was to be able to bring Chad Bowden with him and expand the recruiting operation. So you're going to see that continue to expand under Marcus Freeman. There's no doubt in my mind. Alex Paulser says, do you think Buckner can beat Ohio State? May get lopsided. I don't understand. I mean, could it be a blowout? Sure, I guess. Notre Dame could blow Ohio State out. I mean, look, I don't understand why people think Ohio State's this juggernaut. Ohio State got their butt kicked twice last year, okay? They got their butt kicked by Oregon. That was not a 7-point game. They scored late. Oregon dominated that game from start to finish. The same Oregon team that got physically beat up by Utah, okay? Ohio State gave up over 40 points to Utah, whose offense is mediocre. And they got their butt kicked by Michigan last year, okay? This is not a great Ohio State team. It's a great Ohio State offense that will still be really, really good. But this is not your typical Ohio State 9 future first-round picks on their roster type of thing. Okay, so I don't understand why there's this thought that Notre Dame is just going to go into Columbus and get steamrolled. I don't know where that comes from. So can Tyler Buckner be part of beating Ohio State? Yeah, he can be part of beating Ohio State. He's just one guy. There's 21 other starters and a lot of other guys going to play. But can Tyler Buckner do that? Sure. I mean, let's not forget, Purdue curb stomped Ohio State not that long ago. Iowa curb stomped Ohio State not that long ago. Like I said, Ohio State got embarrassed last year by Michigan. They got outplayed for 60 minutes last year at home by Oregon. I mean, look, if Michael Brewer from Virginia Tech, a year when he threw 18 touchdowns and 15 interceptions, can go into Ohio State and beat them 35-21 in a year that they won a national championship, yes, Tyler Buckner can beat them. So I just don't understand why. Again, anything can happen in football, right? But I don't understand why there's the assumption that Notre Dame is going to go to Columbus and just get their butt kicked, or that Ohio State's just like they're not going to Tuscaloosa, right? That's a fact. That would be a little bit maybe a different story. The Ohio State's a good team. I'm not predicting Notre Dame's going to win that game, but that absolutely should be a good game. All right. Brent Smith says people tend to dismiss Tyler Buckner's junior in high school. 24/7 Sports Composite ranked him as a 5-star recruit. We have our QB1, so now we have to wait and watch Reese go to work. Brent, I do think there's something to that. I do think it's not that people have dismissed it. It's just kind of like one of those things. It was a while ago. He did that. I mean, that was 2019. I mean, I'm not trying to get into a political conversation here because it's not meant to be that at all. But the COVID thing has kind of changed our world a little bit, right? The COVID thing has, and what I mean by that is, this has been a long 2 years, and so like things that happened in 2019 seem a long time ago in our minds, and I think that's kind of what's happening to Tyler is. To your point, we do kind of forget that. Now, Tyler was not a composite 5-star recruit at the end of his career. He was when Notre Dame got him, like at some point in time as a junior, but him not playing and then the camp thing that he didn't have a good camp is he got dropped. He ended up being like number 71, but I had him as a 5-star as a junior. Now, again, because of the injury and because of not playing as a senior, I dropped that grade down to 4.5. I had him as a top 50 recruit. But you're correct. He's a very, very talented player. There's no doubt in my mind he can be effective. It's just how quickly can that happen? Corey Schmida says, I'm expecting dramatic improvement from the offensive line next season. Is it realistic to expect that by game one? Yeah, I would expect the line to be better by game one. Now, will it be in peak midseason form by game one? No. Will it be improved from in game one? It should be. Absolutely should be. There's no question about it. There's no question about it. All right. So that I think that's going to do it. I just want to make sure that there aren't any more super chats that came in. And oh, here we go. Ed says, I guess my question shouldn't be questioning Reese's OC. My question should be, can he develop Tyler and Drew into an elite quarterback? I don't think he can develop Drew into elite quarterback because I don't think Drew has elite talent. I think you can win with Drew. Drew's a good football player, and you can win with him. But with Drew, it's more about, like I said, that point guard quarterback thing where it's like you got to put other really great players around him, and then he can go manage that thing and get the ball where it needs to get to. I like Drew Pine a lot. I don't think Drew's the kind of guy that can put a team on his shoulders and say, follow me to victory. Like, Drew's not going to do what Trevor Lawrence did in 2019 to Ohio State, where it's like the receivers weren't playing well, the line wasn't playing well, they were down 60-0, and Trevor just said, I got this. And went out, just made plays, running, big-time throws, and just put the team on his shoulders. That's not Drew. That's fine. That's not Drew. That's not Mac Jones either. Tyler is that kind of quarterback. Can he develop Tyler? Look, that's the one thing I'll agree with, Ed. We're the same page. To me, it's about can he get the most out of Tyler Buckner? That remains to be seen. We need to see him prove that. So yes, if that's more of your concern, that I am with you on, because I've seen him put together really good game plans. I've seen him call some really good games. We haven't seen him take a young quarterback from scratch and develop him into a big-time player. That we haven't seen. And so, yes, I think that is a legitimate question, Ed. That part of it, we're much more on the same page about. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. All right, let's get down here. See if we have any more good questions here. Okay. I think that is going to do it. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much again. Thank you for wishing my wife happy birthday today. I appreciate that very much. Make sure you stayed locked into irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the message boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure that you're signed up for those, because we're always putting new intel up. Put some new intel up today. Had a backstory on kind of how the D coordinator thing came together. And of course, we can always continue these conversations together. So that's going to be, we have fun with that every single day. So you're definitely going to take advantage of that. Check out the Built Bar, 10% off your entire purchase if you use that promo code Irish Breakdown. Also, if you sign up for the message board for a monthly membership, you get 10% off your entire merch store purchase. And if you sign up for an annual membership, you will get a 20% off discount your entire purchase. So definitely go to boards.irishbreakdown.com and join. And if you just want to support us financially and you're not a person that posts on the message board, there's still value to it because there's intel on there that you don't get anywhere else. But you can also just do that to support us. We also have the Blue Club, the Gold Club, the Shamrock Club. It's kind of the IB Booster Club where you can pay and you get an annual membership, but it's more about just paying to kind of support Irish Breakdown, and we appreciate that as well. So everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow at 12:30. Tomorrow we'll probably have more of a recruiting focus, but keep an eye out. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to reschedule the night show this week. We will have it. I'm just not sure when. So anyway, everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining me and the rest of our crew here at Irish Breakdown and our family down there, our community down there for the Irish Breakdown crew. It's been a lot of fun. So thank you for being a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.